What happens when one of the most respected voices in comedy sits down for what should be a simple conversation, only to face disrespect, condescension, and shocking comments that cross every line? In just 34 seconds of one dismissive remark, a legendary talk show host would destroy his own credibility and reveal himself as someone who had completely lost touch with reality. This is the story of how Bill Maher went from confident television personality to completely exposed, all because he couldn't keep his ego in check when Dave Chappelle walked onto his set. The studio audience was buzzing with excitement. Dave Chappelle, comedy royalty, cultural icon, the man who walked away from $50 million because he refused to compromise his integrity, was about to sit down on real time with Bill Maher. People in the seats were leaning forward. This was the kind of guest that made for unforgettable television. Chappelle had been making his rounds, talking about his latest projects, his perspective on the state of comedy, and what it meant to be an artist in a world that constantly tried to put you in a box. The intro music played. Bill Maher walked out with that signature smirk plastered across his face, soaking in the applause like he always did. He waved to the crowd, buttoned his jacket, and took his seat behind the desk. The cameras were rolling. Millions would be watching this. Tonight, we have someone who needs no introduction, Maher began, his voice dripping with that self-satisfied tone he had perfected over decades on television. A man who walked away from fame, came back on his own terms, and reminded everyone why he's one of the greatest to ever do it. Please welcome Dave Chappelle. The audience erupted. Chappelle walked out, casual, relaxed, wearing jeans and a simple shirt. He didn't need the flashy suit or the rehearsed entrance. His presence alone commanded the room. He shook Maher's hand, gave a small wave to the crowd, and sat down in the guest chair. There was an ease about him, the kind that comes from someone who has nothing to prove. "Dave, good to see you, man," Maher said, leaning back in his chair like he was about to have a casual chat with an old friend. "Good to be here, Bill," Chappelle replied, his voice warm but measured. He knew how these things went. He'd been doing interviews for decades. "So let's jump right in," Maher continued, already shifting into interview mode. "You've been on this incredible run lately. Sold-out shows, specials that break the internet, people hanging on every word. What's it like being Dave Chappelle right now?" Chappelle smiled, a genuine one. "Man, it's a blessing. I get to do what I love, say what I want to say, and people actually want to hear it. Can't ask for much more than that." The audience clapped. It was the kind of answer that reminded everyone why they loved him. Humble but honest. "But it hasn't always been smooth, right?" Maher pushed, his eyebrows raising like he was about to dig into something deeper. "You walked away from that massive deal, disappeared for a while. A lot of people didn't understand it. Some thought you were crazy." Chappelle nodded slowly. "Yeah, people had opinions. But I wasn't living for other people's opinions. I was living for my own peace of mind. Money's great, but it's not worth your soul." "Your soul," Maher repeated, almost mockingly, like the concept was amusing to him. "That's a strong word. I mean, we're talking about a TV show, not some Faustian bargain." There it was, the first crack. Chappelle's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. He'd heard that tone before, the dismissiveness disguised as intellectual banter. "To you, maybe it's just a TV show," Chappelle said calmly. "But when you're the one being asked to compromise everything you believe in, it feels like a lot more than that." Maher waved his hand like he was swatting away a fly. "Come on, Dave. Compromise is part of the game. Everyone compromises. You think I get to say everything I want on this show? There are networks, advertisers, standards, and practices. We all deal with it." "Maybe," Chappelle replied, his voice still even. "But there's a difference between dealing with it and letting it change who you are." The audience was quiet now, sensing the tension starting to build. This wasn't the light, playful conversation they'd expected. Maher leaned forward, that smirk creeping back onto his face. Okay, but let's be real here. You walked away from generational wealth. $50 million. That's not just changing your life. That's changing your kids' lives, your grandkids' lives. And for what? So you could feel good about yourself? Chappelle's jaw tightened, just slightly. Yeah, Bill. So I could feel good about myself. So I could look my kids in the eye and know I didn't sell out. Is that really so hard to understand? No, I get it, Maher said, but his tone said the opposite. I just think there's a certain privilege in being able to make that choice. Most people don't have the luxury of turning down $50 million because they're having an identity crisis. The words hung in the air like smoke. Identity crisis. The audience shifted uncomfortably. Even the cameras seemed to pause. Chappelle stared at Maher for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, but firm. Identity crisis. That's what you think it was. Well, what else would you call it? Maher shot back, clearly thinking he had the upper hand. You had everything, and you just walked away. Sounds like someone who didn't know what they wanted. I knew exactly what I wanted, Chappelle said, his voice gaining strength. I wanted my dignity. I wanted control over my own work. I wanted to not be treated like a puppet. Maher laughed, actually laughed, like the whole thing was absurd. A puppet? Dave, you were the star. You had your name on the show. You were making millions. That's not being a puppet. That's being successful. Success on whose terms? Chappelle countered. Theirs or mine? On the terms that pay the bills, Maher said, his voice getting sharper now. Look, I respect what you did. I really do. But let's not act like it was some noble sacrifice. You left, you did your thing, and then you came back when the money was right. So what was the point? The room went dead silent. Even the crew members behind the cameras stopped moving. Chappelle's face was stone. The point, Chappelle said slowly, was that when I came back as myself. Not as what someone else wanted me to be. That's the difference you don't seem to get. Maher shook his head, that condescending smile never leaving his face. I think you're overthinking it, man. This business, it's not that deep. You do the work, you get paid, you move on. All this talk about integrity and souls, it sounds great, but at the end of the day, we're all just trying to make a living. Maybe that's all it is to you, Chappelle said, and now there was an edge in his voice. But some of us actually care about what we put out into the world. Oh, come on, Maher said, throwing his hands up. Don't give me that holier-than-thou routine. You're not some spiritual guru. You're a comedian. You tell jokes. Let's not pretend it's more important than it is. The audience gasped. Actual gasps. This had gone from uncomfortable to shocking. Maher had just dismissed Chappelle's entire career, his artistry, his impact, as if it was nothing. Chappelle sat back in his chair, nodding slowly, like he was processing what he just heard. So that's what you think. Comedy is just jokes, nothing more. Exactly, Maher said, clearly missing the danger he was walking into. It's entertainment. We're not curing cancer here. We're not solving world hunger. We make people laugh. That's it. That's it, Chappelle repeated, his voice barely above a whisper. Man, I feel sorry for you. Maher's smile faltered for the first time. Excuse me? I said I feel sorry for you, Chappelle said louder now. You've been doing this for how many years? Decades. And you still don't understand what comedy actually is. You think it's just making people laugh. You think it's just entertainment. You have no idea. Enlighten me then, Maher said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Tell me what I'm missing. Chappelle leaned forward, looking Maher dead in the eyes. Comedy is how we process pain. It's how we speak truth to power. It's how we hold up a mirror to society and make them see themselves. It's one of the most important art forms we have, and you're sitting here treating it like it's a parlor trick. That's very poetic, Maher said, rolling his eyes. But let's be honest. Most comedy is just people trying to get laughs, including yours. You don't know anything about my comedy, Chappelle said, his voice rising. You don't know why I do what I do. You don't know what it costs. Oh, here we go, Maher said, leaning back and crossing his arms. The tortured artist routine. Give me a break, Dave. You're rich, you're famous, you're loved. You don't get to play the victim here. That was it. The final straw. Chappelle stood up. The audience gasped again, louder this time. This wasn't part of the script. This wasn't how these things were supposed to go. I'm not playing anything, Chappelle said, his voice cutting through the studio like a knife. But I'm also not going to sit here and let you disrespect me, my work, or everything I've built. Maher looked genuinely shocked. Disrespect? I'm having a conversation. No, Chappelle said firmly. You're talking down to me. You've been doing it since I sat down. You invited me here, and you've done nothing but mock everything I stand for. That's not what Maher started, but Chappelle cut him off. Yeah, it is. You called my decision to leave an identity crisis. You said, my work isn't important. You laughed at the idea that I might actually care about something beyond a paycheck. You want to know what the real problem is, Bill? You've been on the air so long, you forgot that there are people who actually believe in what they do. The cameras were still rolling. The audience was frozen. No one knew what to do. Maher tried to recover, his voice taking on a defensive tone. Dave, come on. You're being way too sensitive about this. I'm just asking questions. Asking questions, Chappelle repeated, shaking his head. Man, you're not asking questions. You're trying to tear me down because you can't understand why someone would choose principles over profit. That says a lot more about you than it does about me. This is ridiculous, Maher said, his face flushing red now. You come on my show, and you're going to stand here and lecture me? I didn't come here to lecture anybody, Chappelle said, his voice steady, despite the anger underneath. I came here thinking we'd have a real conversation. But you don't want a conversation. You want someone to agree with your cynical view of the world, and I'm not going to do that. Then maybe you should leave, Maher shot back, his own anger finally showing through. The studio went silent. Even the audience members seemed to stop breathing. Chappelle looked at Maher for a long moment, then nodded. You know what? You're right. I should. He started to walk toward the exit. The cameras followed him. The audience didn't know whether to applaud or stay silent. Some people started to clap, slowly at first, then louder. Dave, wait, Maher called out, realizing too late what was happening. Let's take a breath here. But Chappelle didn't stop. He didn't turn around. He just kept walking, his head held high, his dignity intact. Dave, Maher called again, standing up from his desk. Come on, man. Don't do this. Chappelle reached the studio door and paused, just for a second. He turned back, looked at Maher one last time, and said, You did this, not me. Then he was gone. The door closed behind him with a heavy thud that echoed through the studio. Maher stood there, speechless, his face a mixture of shock and anger. The audience was applauding now, fully, loudly, not for Maher, but for Chappelle, for the man who refused to be disrespected, for the man who walked away, again, because his integrity meant more than any television appearance. Maher tried to laugh it off, waving his hand dismissively. Well, that was dramatic, he said, but his voice cracked. No one was laughing with him. The producer's voice came through the studio speakers. We're going to commercial. The lights dimmed. The audience was buzzing, talking amongst themselves, shocked by what they'd just witnessed. Maher sat back down at his desk, running his hand through his hair, clearly trying to process what had just happened. But it was too late. The damage was done. In trying to assert his dominance, in trying to be the smart guy in the room, Maher had revealed himself as exactly what Chappelle had said. Someone who had lost touch with what really mattered. Someone who valued cleverness over compassion, ego over empathy. The cameras had caught everything. Every dismissive comment, every condescending laugh, every moment where Maher thought he was winning, but was actually losing. And Chappelle's exit, that powerful, dignified walk away from someone who didn't deserve his time, would be replayed over and over. Because that's what happens when you invite a legend onto your show and treat him like he's beneath you. That's what happens when you confuse cynicism with wisdom. That's what happens when you forget that respect is earned, not given. Bill Maher had spent decades building a reputation as a fearless interviewer, someone who asked the tough questions and didn't back down. But in 34 seconds of one callous remark about identity crisis, he showed his true colors. He showed that beneath all the bravado and the political commentary and the self-righteousness, he was just another talk show host who cared more about being right than being decent. And Dave Chappelle, without saying another word after he left that studio, reminded everyone watching why he was different, why he was special, why he was someone worth listening to. Because when you stand for something real, when you refuse to compromise your values for anyone, when you're willing to walk away from anything that doesn't align with who you are, you don't need to explain yourself. Your actions speak louder than any words ever could. Maher sat at that desk, trying to figure out how to salvage the rest of his show, how to spin what had just happened into something that didn't make him look like the villain. But there was no spinning it. The truth was out there, recorded, witnessed by everyone in that studio and everyone watching at home. He'd invited Dave Chappelle, a man who had proven time and time again that he couldn't be bought, couldn't be controlled, couldn't be made to play someone else's game. And then Maher had tried to do exactly that. He'd tried to make Chappelle defend choices that needed no defense. He'd tried to reduce a complex, principled decision to a simple matter of money and ego. And Chappelle had shown him, and everyone watching, exactly what happens when you try to diminish greatness. The commercial break ended. Maher came back on camera, his composure somewhat recovered, but his energy completely different. He tried to make a joke about what had happened, something about comedians being sensitive, but it fell flat. The audience gave a weak, uncomfortable laugh. Everyone knew what they'd seen. "All right, well," Maher said, shuffling his papers awkwardly. "Let's move on to our next segment." But there was no moving on. Not really, because what had happened in those minutes before Chappelle walked out would define that episode. That moment, that entire exchange, it would be the clip that circulated, the moment that people talked about, the perfect example of what happens when ego meets integrity and loses. Chappelle was probably already on his way out of the building, back to his life, back to his work, completely unbothered by what had just transpired. Because he'd been through worse. He'd walked away from bigger things. This was just another moment where he chose himself over someone else's expectations. And Maher, he was left on that stage, trying to finish a show that everyone had already stopped caring about. Because when Dave Chappelle walks out on you, when he decides you're not worth his time, the message is clear. Not just to you, but to everyone watching. You messed up. You disrespected the wrong person. You forgot that some people can't be bought, can't be bullied, can't be made to feel small, no matter how big your platform is. That studio audience, they'd come expecting entertainment. They got something more. They got a masterclass in dignity, in self-respect, in knowing your worth. They saw someone refuse to accept disrespect in real time. They saw what it looks like when someone actually lives by their principles instead of just talking about them. The stage manager was probably freaking out backstage. The producers were probably scrambling to figure out damage control. Maher's publicist was probably already drafting statements, but none of it would matter. The moment was captured. The truth was out. Maher had positioned himself as the edgy truth teller, the guy who wasn't afraid to say what everyone else was thinking. But in that conversation with Chappelle, he'd revealed that his version of truth-telling was just thinly veiled arrogance. He didn't want to explore ideas. He wanted to be right. He wanted to prove he was smarter, more rational, more grounded than his guest. And Chappelle had simply refused to play along. He'd answered honestly, tried to engage genuinely, and when it became clear that Maher wasn't interested in an actual exchange of ideas, he left. No dramatics, no yelling match, no long speech. Just a quiet statement and a walk toward the door. That's power. Real power. Not the power of a television platform or a captive audience. The power of knowing yourself so completely that no one else's opinion can shake you. The show continued, but it was just going through the motions. Maher did his panel, made his jokes, gave his closing thoughts. But the energy was gone. The audience was still processing what they'd witnessed. Some of them were probably wondering if they should have done more, cheered louder, made it clear whose side they were on. But Chappelle didn't need them to take sides. He'd taken his own side. He'd stood up for himself in the most powerful way possible by refusing to participate in his own disrespect. When the show finally ended and the audience filed out, they were talking. Not about the panel discussion or the topical jokes. They were talking about Dave Chappelle walking out, about how Maher had pushed too far, about how satisfying it was to see someone actually draw a line and enforce it. Because in a world where everyone seems willing to compromise, to bite their tongue, to go along to get along, watching someone say, "No, not me, not today," is powerful. It's inspiring. It's a reminder that you don't have to accept disrespect just because someone has a microphone and a camera. Maher probably went home that night thinking about the conversation, replaying it in his mind, trying to figure out where it went wrong. Maybe he blamed Chappelle for being too sensitive. Maybe he blamed the audience for not backing him up. Maybe he blamed the format, the timing, the setup. But the truth was simpler than any of that. It went wrong because Maher couldn't see past his own ego long enough to have a genuine conversation with someone who deserved better. It went wrong because he treated a legend like a debate opponent. It went wrong because he forgot the most basic rule of interviewing: respect your guest. And Chappelle, in walking away, had taught a lesson that would echo far beyond that studio. He'd shown that your platform, your position, your perceived power means nothing if you don't have respect. That you can have all the witty comebacks and all the political insights in the world, but if you can't treat people with basic decency, you've already lost. The footage would live forever. People would watch it, analyze it, use it as an example in conversations about integrity, about boundaries, about knowing when to walk away. And every time someone watched it, they'd see the same thing. Bill Maher, sitting at his desk, watching Dave Chappelle's back as he left, realizing too late that he'd made a mistake he couldn't take back. Because some moments define you. Some moments reveal who you really are, underneath all the performance and persona. And in that moment, Maher revealed that beneath the confident talk show host was someone who didn't understand the first thing about respect, about artistry, about what it means to actually stand for something. And Chappelle revealed what everyone already knew, that he was exactly who he appeared to be. Principled, unbending, unwilling to compromise his dignity for anyone or anything. That's the story. Not about a dramatic television moment or a celebrity feud. It's about what happens when someone who values appearance meets someone who values substance. When someone who performs principles meets someone who lives them. And in that collision, there's only ever one outcome. The person with real integrity walks away, and the person who was faking it gets left behind, exposed, with nothing but cameras and an audience that's already moved on.